Greetings and welcome to this edition of The People's Voice, produced and presented by your host Shabnam Palesa Mohamed for SPM Media, broadcasting live out of South Africa. It's Wednesday, the 15th of September 2021. Welcome to the program. I'd ask you to please start sharing this conversation amongst your various networks and platforms so people have access to information in an age where censorship has become normal, even in our much lauded democracy. Before I introduce our critical topic and our robust guest today, remember you can also download this video once we're done with the program, re-upload it and tag me at Shabnam Palesa Mo on Twitter. So what's our topic today? Forced jabs, jab passports, jabbing children, and what is the way forward? Tonight, we're going to clarify the position of 5 of South Africa's political parties. There's a very famous quote that says, diapers and politicians need to be changed often and for the same reason. No pun intended, and I think our panel certainly accepts that. In good faith, I'm going to just remove Mr. Nyaku from the stream for a second. Remember, we'll be taking your questions from the audience. They'll be fielded by our social media team. While we value your excellent comments, what we're looking for is questions of our panel. This is your opportunity to find out what these political parties stand for. Are they going to stand with the will of the people? You can also tweet to me at Shabnam Palesa Mo the most important points you feel our guests have made this evening. Let's highlight the positions that they are taking. Let's let our country and our world know what South Africa's politicians are all about. Our guests today in the order of the poster only, and I will introduce them into studio now, is Ahmed Mansoor Shaik Emam, Steve Swart, Billy Nyaku, Fatima Abdool, and Imtiaz. Welcome to the People's Voice. You can put your mics on to say hello.
Hi guys.
Good evening and thank you, Shabnam.
Hello,
Most welcome. Hello, everybody. And so these are the political parties that will be on the spot today. Mr. Emam is from the NFP, Mr. Steve Swart from the ACDP, Billy Nyaku with the Party of Action, Fatima Abdool with UIM, and Imtiaz with the ACC. Let's get straight into it. Remember, your comments and questions we'll be fielding during the course of the conversation. We're looking for questions over comments. This is your opportunity, right? First question, let's get straight into it. To all of the political parties on the panel tonight, our first question, please declare any conflicts of interest you have with any affiliation to big pharmaceutical industry, whether in South Africa or abroad. Mr. Emam, anything to declare?
Nothing at all, nothing to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Swart?
Nothing to declare besides the occasional panado that I take.
Thank you. Mr. Nyaku, any conflicts of interest?
I've got nothing to declare. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Abdool, any conflicts of interest with Big Pharma, South Africa or abroad?
Nothing to declare, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sayed, any conflicts of interest? Now is your moment.
No, from my side.
Nice and clear. So you've heard it. They're all being recorded. They're live and you can hold them accountable. All right. Our first question. The experts, often in inverted commas, agree at least on the basics. That jabs don't prevent infection. They don't prevent transmission. Neither are they a cure for COVID-19. In addition, we know that at least 80% of South Africans have already had the coronavirus. And so natural immunity is at an all-time high in our country. In fact, antivirals will become necessary. There are some of those very effective antivirals that are being censored. We know that. And these antivirals are currently being tested in some Asian countries. With that being said, what is your party's position on forced shots, and what will you do to stand on that position, Mr. Emam?
Well, let me start off by saying that the National Freedom Party is clear about this. In a democracy, in a constitutional democracy, you cannot demand people must actually be forced to accept it. Particularly if there is not enough evidence, to confirm that these vaccines are effective. Now, we've had discussions time and time again, even with the health experts and the authority in the country. And none of us have thus far been able to convince us, indeed, that the vaccines are going to work. Now, we know that normally we all grew up with vaccines. Remember, the vaccines we're talking about for COVID-19 were created and developed, manufactured, and distributed in a couple of months. Normally, you need a 2-year waiting period for you to establish the effectiveness, side effects, and things. Nothing of that sort has ever happened. Now, more importantly, we're sitting with a situation right now that even though people have taken the vaccines, it didn't stop them from getting infected. It did not stop them from having serious side effects. In fact, many people have died. And I know, and Honorable Swart will agree with me, we have interrogated the National Department of Health and SAPRA. We even went on to want to know from them, how do you establish that none of those people that died after taking the vaccines died as a result of those vaccines? Because there's been no investigation, no autopsies, nothing done, but people have died. So in the absence of any concrete evidence that it is effective, that it is going to help you to prevent the spread of this virus and to get the virus, we don't believe that you should be put under pressure to go to vaccine.
Mr. Emam, what will the NFP do to stand on that position? What is the plan by the NFP?
Well, we are opposed to this mafia kind of an operation where pharmaceutical companies want to dictate the terms in the country, and particularly, a government, seems to want to follow suit by doing this, and we believe it is not acceptable. People must have the right to be able to choose. As such, the National Freedom Party is totally opposed to this, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that people are not forced to take the vaccine against their will.
Thank you, Mr. Emam. Mr. Swart, what is your party's position on forced shots, and what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes. Your mic, sir.
The ACDP believes that everyone has the freedom of choice, whether to have the vaccines or not. The choice must be based on informed consent, on the knowledge, is the vaccine safe? Do you know what the contents are? And can you give informed consent? And there are a lot of questions about that, as Shaik Imam has already articulated, and the questions that we as the ACDP and of course the NFP have asked in the Health Portfolio Committee. So we are totally opposed to any form of mandatory vaccines. We believe this goes against our fundamental rights, our right of bodily integrity, as well as the requirements now that employers are requiring their workers. That is wrong, and that we will contest. It's very important. We should rather be looking at, as we know that COVID-19 is here, a strategy to protect vulnerable people with comorbidities, the aged, shelter them. Why must we vaccinate everyone with an experimental vaccine still? And yes, we're not opposed to vaccines, as Shaik Imam indicated, the vaccines that were tried and proven. But here we have an experimental vaccine that has been rolled out, and pressure is building upon us by so many different instances. And we as the ACDP are totally opposed to that. And in the second question, what are we going to do about it? Like we did with the ivermectin issue, we went to court. We spent a lot of time, we contested it, and by going to court, we put pressure on the Minister of Health as well as SAPRA, and they conceded the point, and ivermectin is now much more widely accessible, and we will litigate on this matter if necessary. Our leader last week took on President Ramaphosa in Parliament, asking the questions about mandatory vaccines, and we will stand firmly on this issue. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Mr. Swart. Mr. Nyaku, I'm going to put your mic on so you can answer this question. What is your party's position on the forced jabs or shots, more appropriately, and what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for affording me the opportunity. So let me hit the nail on the head. So POA's position on forced jab has always been crystal clear. It is a big no. This position is permanent. Forced jab in a democratic country gives birth to tyranny. Tyranny erodes human dignity, human rights, and freedom. So forced jab on citizens is abuse of power, and everyone who has a burning willingness to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution must declare war on such misguided enforcement. So we all know that vaccines do not vaccines do not prevent COVID-19. You get fully vaccinated and still contract COVID-19 and be hospitalized or even die. So making vaccines mandatory when they cannot even prevent COVID-19 shows the government is ill-advised by some individuals pursuing their own personal interest. So POA is already at work. On the 26th of August, we held the first anti-lockdown press briefing in Johannesburg. Mainstream media, of course, did turn blind eye on it. So the briefing was covered by certain religious media groups. So we are currently busy establishing anti-mandatory task teams that will be empowered to carry out duties that are specifically aimed at fighting mandatory shots. So these teams will exist in all the provinces of South Africa and work with all those who stand opposed to mandatory shots.
Thank you, Mr. Nyaku, for that. Ms. Abdool, same question. What is your party's position on forced jabs, and what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
Okay, my mic is going on and off. Apologies for that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Shabnam, for that question. We are 100%, like the ACDP and the previous parties, against the forceful, mandatory, manipulative way that this government is going about forcing our citizens to take something. I don't even want to acknowledge the word COVID-19 or a virus. That's just me, myself, personally. Something is killing our people. We don't exactly know what it is. A so-called vaccine was devised or created within a few months. I don't acknowledge that as a vaccine as well. It is a jab or a shot. We don't know what is in there. So we are vehemently against it. We are against the fact that our people are not fully informed before and after they've taken the shot. We are against the coercion and the fact that, as the previous speaker said, that people are being fired. People are being left out in the cold without any income, and we are already creating an awareness. We've been doing that for months now on social media, personally, on groups, social media groups, Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups. We are giving the information to people, letting them know that they must be very careful before they just get coerced into doing something that they are not even fully aware of. So we are 100% against it.
Thank you, Ms. Abdool. Mr. Sayed, you can put your mic on. What is your party's position on forced jabs, and what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
I think, for the sake of clarity, I think we need to always refer back to our constitution. Our constitution, in terms of the Bill of Rights in 12.2, especially B and C, where it says you have a right to choose, right? You have a right to integrity and to decide on how you use your body or what you need to do. So in terms of whether government can or cannot enforce this, it's quite clear in the constitution. They will need to make applications, change the constitution so that they can enforce this jab. But the issue still comes in wherein we are quite challenged in terms of saying that even if government, and let's leave government out of this for now, but if in the private sector you have different businesses and companies that are insisting that people are vaccinated before they enter certain premises like the airports, like travel and tourism, like hotels, and like all of this, and this is of great concern for us. So as much as government exists, we need to understand that, or government needs to understand that they need to stick in their lane. Their lane is to protect the people, the rights of the people, and they need to stick in that space, not decide on health issues that are unverified. Now, if you're speaking about a vaccine, and I'll tell you now in no uncertain terms, I've traveled through Africa, and out in Mozambique, you can buy one of those yellow cards to cross the border. It costs 500 Rand. And what we're opening up by enforcing this thing about saying that everyone needs to be forced, you're going to open up an entire black market of vaccine approvals that would be registered and all legit, and you get your COVID passport. But are you really affecting what you plan to affect? So that's the issue that we have with that. But let us go back a little bit. Does government have a full understanding of what's happening in the country at the moment with regard to COVID-19? No, they don't. So how do they move from firstly not understanding when lockdown is actually going to end, having a clear discussion about this is our plan moving forward, because all we get is we're having a family meeting and we're extending the lockdown, or we're bringing it to lockdown 2 and something picks up. So we cannot normalize in this current situation. Government needs to stick in its lane, come up with a clear drafted policy in terms of COVID-19, and then talk to us about vaccines after they've discussed all avenues in terms of our human rights.
Mr. Sayed, what will the ACC do to stand on this position?
We're quite clear. I mean, with any business that's going to be discriminatory against people that do not or are unvaccinated, we will mobilize, and we will go and we will make sure we will protest outside those business premises. Because if you want to operate in that space, then you need to be clearly defined that there is a non-vaxxed area in your restaurant and a vaxxed area, which is fine, but that's also discriminating in its own right. Because, for example, in my current family situation, my mom is anti-vax. I'm not saying that I'm for vaccinations. I'm saying I'm for vaccinations when it's approved, it's tried, it's tested and all of that. Then I might get vaccinated just like I had to do it in school. I don't have a problem with it. But I have a problem with vaccinations that have not been tried and tested. You're using us as guinea pigs. I have a major issue. So if government came out with a strategy and said, we have a hotspot, can we test the vaccinations in this hotspot? And let's do our own trials as South African government, not rely on overseas and all of these people to come and tell us what we should and should not be doing, as though we behave like a third world, we act like a third world, and therefore we treat it like a third world. That's the current situation.
Thank you. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there, Mr. Sayed. Thank you for that. A couple of comments coming through panel. Janine van Skalkwyk, thank you for representing us and protecting our health and lives. We know the risks and we cannot take this lightly with the severe consequences. Barbie Fotheringham talks about when will the WHO be convinced that these experimental jabs are not working, and how many injuries or deaths will be enough before they stop. Janine, again, you are all on the right side of history. We applaud you. Kashifa Pandey, well done for protecting the right to bodily integrity. Renshia Draganis, well done, and thank you for your authenticity to take this on. Teresa Grayling talking about how will the political parties prevent forced shots in the workplace when we're forced to face no jab, no job. So questions already starting to come through, and you can include them in your responses. Chris 142, Big Pharma dictates to the government. Grace says people are not interested. Finish and Kla. Janine also says we would need the same policy for TB, hepatitis, HIV, etc. It's a slippery slope. Right, moving on to our second question. Our third question, a survey of social media comments on news stories promoting shot passports is overwhelmingly against, and I'm sure our panel is very well aware of this if you survey these comments. In fact, people are threatening boycotts, so they will not support businesses that make jabs mandatory. They're also talking about strikes and stayaways and shutdowns to reject what is viewed to be a modern-day dom pass. What is your party's position on jab passports? And again, what will you do to stand on that position, Mr. Imam?
Thank you, Shabnam. Yeah, you know, I think one thing we must make very clear. It is not just the issue of government. I think we must be very, very clear about that. Because there are also others in government or political parties that are also supporting exactly what is the stand of government. So we'll be very, very clear about that. It's not just the government. There are many, many people in this country that are for the issue of passports and vaccinations and things like that. So we must be very, very careful about that. But I think coming back to your point here, you know, what is happening in the country, you're actually being held to ransom. It's as if you have no choice. You are now being told, and we've just heard the plight of the restaurant trade. What happened to them? How many businesses have closed? Now you're putting added pressure on them to say that if you are not going to be allowed any of these visitors to your restaurants, no patrons are allowed if they are not vaccinated. Now, we think this is totally unacceptable. And let me also tell you one of the reasons why we are totally opposed to this. It's not as if in the country you do not have alternative treatment. There is alternative treatment, like Honorable Swart spoke about the ivermectin and many other treatments, the success story of Dr. Shankara Chetty and many others. There is alternatives to the so-called virus that we have in the country. But no emphasis appears to be put onto this, no matter what efforts are being made. They're not even entertaining or reviewing any of the data. There were applications that were made that have not been entertained. So it appears that all they want to do is push for these vaccines, and that's why they're coming up with the so-called Tombas system, which we've lived with during the days of apartheid. We think it is totally unacceptable. On the one hand, your constitution gives you the freedom of right to choose. On the other hand, you are telling us there's no right to choose. You either do this or. And that's not acceptable. So our point is very, very clear. You do not have the right. Now, we also understand that sometimes the circumstances can be different in a pandemic. But until you yourself is convinced that the product you are marketing works, how can you go and insist that people must take this and be vaccinated? I mean, clearly you can't do that because you're putting other people at risk. Now, here you are telling them you must take the vaccines. If you don't have a passport, you're not going to get to those restaurants. You can't travel, you can't go to school, you can't go to work, you can't do anything. And yet, they have not convinced the nation and the world that these vaccines work. In the evidence before us, it is clear. People have taken the vaccine and they have still tested positive. People have still died. They still had side effects. And one very important thing we've now learned, these vaccines don't cause herd immunity. There's no more herd immunity. So that's out. Even that falls away. So that 70 and 80 and 60%, even that falls away. So we believe in terms of the passport, it's totally unacceptable. And like Honorable Swart said, like our stance was with the ivermectin, we have to fight this all the way. We have to do what is in the interest of our people and our children particularly. Because you're even putting our children at risk.
Thank you, Mr. Imam. Mr. Swart, what is your party's position on the jab or shot passports, and what will you do to stand on that position?
No, we're absolutely in agreement with the NFP and Shaik Imam on this. We are totally opposed to it. It is totally unacceptable. And bear in mind that I was one of the first to get COVID-19 on the 15th of March last year. And that was when the first lockdown was promulgated. And remember, there's a saying, beware the Ides of March. And a year later, I believe I've built up natural immune system that you do not have to have the vaccine. The most recent reports are now coming out from the FDA in the USA to say that the vaccines only are effective, in their view, for 5 months. So in other words, every 5 months you're going to have another vaccine treatment, which we know is ineffective. They say you've still got to be social distancing, you still got to wear a mask. To us, this passport is unacceptable. We will continue to oppose it, as we did with the issue relating to ivermectin. And we believe that this indirect pressure that is being placed, and Shaik Imam is 100% correct. It comes from government, but businesses now are starting of themselves to start promote these issues. No job, no jab. And we would say to any viewer that is under that pressure, contact the political parties represented here. Contact the NFP, the ACDP. We're in Parliament. We have got lawyers. We've got Labour lawyers. Shabnam, you're a wonderful lawyer yourself. And we've got to start fighting these issues on Labour law basis so that the courts can find in our favour. But we've got to have a strong pushback on these issues. We cannot allow this to continue. It was never implemented with the most serious HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis. Why is it being implemented now?
Ending off on a good question there. Thank you, Mr. Swart. Mr. Nyaku, you can put your mic on there. Same question. What is your position on the jab or shot passports, and what will the POA do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to start off by firmly stating that I contracted COVID-19 last year, 11th of July. So I recovered successfully without having been jabbed. So I have developed natural immunity, of course, and I'm healthy. People should take note of that. So jab passports should be considered destructive to societal order. They are not in the best interest of health of the citizens. So Israel is the perfect example of jab passports that are unnecessary, because over 80% of the population there is vaccinated, but currently new cases are skyrocketing. And when you look at those cases, most of them are vaccinated. So this renders jabs not effective method to introduce passports. So POA members are ready to go extra mile to disregard short's passport, and they will not respect anyone enforcing that. So there is no skepticism or doubt that we will be part of the protest aimed at vaccines passport. So we will be in action. We cannot allow a medical tyranny. We are motivated by what is happening in France. So if you are watching TV, we are listening to the news on radio all the time, you realize that French people are up in arms there. Day in, day out, they are protesting against the vax. So the protesters are resisting medical coercion. So they are not getting tired. They are amazing. Actually, victory does not come overnight. So it is both physical and mental preparation. So lastly, vaccine passports have no value but to put pressure on the unvaccinated to get vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nyaku. Ms. Abdool, same question. What is your party's position on shot passports, and what will you do to stand on that position?
We should acknowledge the fact that it's not, when she said it, she was ostracized and she was called Mampara of the Week or whatever. This is not really about a virus or healing people. It is about the vaccine, and ultimately it's about this passport. It's more about control, and this is not a South African problem. It's a global situation. I'm of the meaning that our president is 100% aware of what is happening and why things are happening the way it is happening. I'm also of the opinion that the billions of rands, hundreds of billions of rands, has everything to do with the fact that we are where we are at right now. 5 presidents outside of this country, African presidents, are killed because they would not submit to this whole narrative. I believe that our president is actually fighting for his life, and that is why he is absolutely following the agenda of what was told to him to do. So whether we resist here in South Africa or resist globally, it is something that is planned, it is discussed, it has to do with our finances, businesses, blockchain, what is this currency, cryptocurrency, everything embroiled together has to do with what is happening now. And they had to introduce a so-called virus for us to get to this point. And it was successfully executed last year, March, when we were so scared of this virus that's going to kill people, of which 92%, there's a 92% rate of being healed. Here are the testimonials. So it is not a deadly virus, but they have created such a fear amongst people that people are now scared of dying, and that's why they take the vax. Now you see there's a war going on between the vaxxed and the non-vaxxed. People are being divided, and so that divide and rule narrative is successful once again. At first, it was nations
That's
and
an
races.
important point. It's an important point, Ms. Abdool, but what will the UIM do to stand on this position of being, as I understand it, against the shot passports? What will you do?
Passive resistance. If companies and entities, etc., refuses people to enter their businesses and shops and so on because they are not vaxxed, then we just don't go. We have to mobilize businesses that sees the nonsense for what it really is. Those businesses will obviously, permit people to because there is a division. There are restaurants and companies that says, we don't need you to be vexed. Come to our shops. So we need to mobilize more of those type of companies that says, no, but you know what, we're not perpetuating this narrative at all. So then the people will have to go to those shops.
All right, and we do know that there is a red list and a green list being developed to distinguish between these different establishments and the decisions that they're actually making. Mr. Sayed, what is your party's position on shot passports, and what will you do to stand on that position?
I think, before we answer the question, we must understand the climate and the space we're in currently. The issue of the vaccine passport, for us, there's 3 tiers to it. There's the international climate that's also speaking to the same thing, right? Now, if you are not allowed to travel because you don't have a vaccine passport, like, for example, previously you never had the yellow card for polio and meningitis and all of that. Now, are we speaking to that, or are we speaking to it in the South African context? Because if we're speaking to it in an international context, we've got to be clear in understanding. We're against it completely in the current climate of COVID, because our government, nor has the international scientific community, come to a clear understanding of what we're dealing with. If they don't understand what we're dealing with, how it mutates, when it mutates, and if the vaccine works against this different Delta variant and all of those different variants, and quite clearly, I'm not afraid of it because I'm not a health fanatic, nor am I a scientist. So I'm clear in understanding of what my lane is. The scientific community needs to come together internationally and have a clear understanding first and foremost as to what is the progress, where are we, what is transparent, and we need to either debunk these conspiracy theories or we need to affirm them. Is it what we're thinking it is? Is it not? Give us clarity on where we are and where we stand, so that way we know how to move forward. Because if you're telling us we're being vaccinated because it's the new world order, then so be it. But be clear and tell us that that's what it is. And you need to now be vaccinated in order to do anything else. And this is the way it's going to be. So be clear, and it is warfare or terrorism or whatever it is you want to call it, but be open about it. Let us not lie to each other about these things. So the scientific community needs to come together internationally and be clear, because the challenge you're going to face isn't, even if our government doesn't say that the vaccine is supposed to, we're going to make it for everybody, and it's a must and a have. How do you travel overseas? How do you go to countries that have adopted this policy? You now no longer can travel. So that's the international climate. When you're looking at it from the South African context, our government needs to have clarity, and we need to not follow suit. I was in Malawi a month ago, right? And I was there for at least 5 days. I get into Malawi, and let me tell you something. There is no COVID-19 there. There's nothing. Everyone's walking around without masks. And I'm asking people, are you not worried about COVID? No, we don't have COVID here. This is Malawi. What are we talking about here? I tried to get a COVID-19 test before I had to come back into South Africa. There are only 2 hospitals in Blantyre and Lilongwe, the capital cities, that only do testing. What does that tell you? That there's no COVID in the area and there's no deaths. I'm not seeing ambulances and all of that going around. And I asked my guys, what are you doing? When people are getting sick, you'll see moringa leaves, moringa trees being planted all over Malawi, and they're just boiling it in hot water and drinking it whenever someone has the symptoms of flu.
Mr. Sayed, that is a very important perspective, and certainly we want to highlight the roles of medicines like Artemisia, Lengano, Mhlonyane as well. But coming back to the question on the passport, the shot passports, what will your party do to stand in your position, which I presume is against these passports?
Totally against. I mean, at the end of the day, in the South African context, we are saying government cannot approve or force anyone to take the vaccine based on the fact that we have a constitution. And that's clear in our understanding. But more so, we're against any businesses that are saying that we are only for vaccinated people and not for non-vaccinated people, because that's just discriminatory ultimately, and it's not going to go down very well with us.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Said. Moving on then to take a couple of comments. Prabhashni Subrayan Naidu, who is an attorney. Let's bring Mr. Nyaku back into the conversation there. She says that short passports is a violation of our basic rights. It infringes the rights enshrined in our constitution. Dr. Peter Munns, good evening, Shabnam and panelists. The situation is simple. Media is the real virus. Fear is the pandemic, and it's only common sense that is the cure. How do these political parties intend on dealing with the fear-mongering and educate the people to put an immediate end to this experimental control process? So bear that question in mind for the next round. After Peter Munn's question, how do you intend on dealing with the fear-mongering and educating the public? Dr. Ivan Jardine, exactly, there are alternative treatments. These are actively suppressed to push the jabs. Prabhashni continues, it's a violation of the right to choose and the right to unrestricted freedom of movement. Renee Breitenbach, medical apartheid / tyranny, vaxxed versus the unvaxxed. Party of Action Wisdom comments, tyranny has no place in our hearts and in our land. I'm told that YouTube is giving us some issues with the broadcast, as expected. Khian Tia Giggs Davis, if the jabs were so effective as they claim it to be, why are the manufacturers not taking any liability? Smart South Africans right there. Renshia Draganis, and the vaccinated now use ivermectin to protect themselves. So why suppress its efficacy in early treatment? Dr. Jardine also talks about vitamin C, D, zinc, IVM, hydroxychloroquine. Barbie Fotheringham, it's obvious that it's nothing to do with our health. It's purely money driven. There's no data on short, mid, or long-term side effects, and nobody is held responsible. Couple of comments here on immunity. Marina Muehlberg-Smith, from initial research we've done, all companies pushing mandatory jabs, and she lists a couple of them here in the comments. Old Mutual, Discovery, Curro, Sanlam, PSG, Game, Massmart, etc. have got Vanguard holding significant shares. It's about the bottom line. It's not about health. And a reminder from Renat Advocat to fill in the surveyor's quick form to register a negative reaction to the jab. It's bit.ly, bit.ws/GK capital X9. Let's bring Mr. Nyaku back in. I think there's a network issue having there. Dr. Jardine also mentions nebulizing with hydroxychloroquine, silver nitrate. Nikki Buerta asks, how is government calculating shot injuries and deaths? If I'm not mistaken, anyone who's contracted the virus in less than 28 days after receiving a jab is still counted as an unjabbed case. That's a fact. Personally, that sounds like scientific fraud. Very few people are able to even understand or even explain that. Jason Vessels, the president is only pushing the jabs whenever he makes his sudden appearances. He never mentions alternative treatments, and they are treatments that work. Their treatments, their science proves that the vaccine doesn't protect against getting reinfections, and the same as masks, it offers no protection too. Dr. Evie Rapiti, it is well established that natural immunity confers 10 times more protection than the jabs. Why is the government ignoring natural immunity? We're going to get to the issue of children very, very shortly. Imran Vali asking about the major companies enforcing the jabs and a labor law update. Mimzo Suela talking about victims of shedding and how people are getting sick from being exposed to people who are jabbed. Shanaz Ismail, apartheid in a new jacket. Dr. Rapiti also talking about employers who should take responsibility for their employees if they insist on mandating the jabs, which of course we know is completely illegal. Estelle Mansfield, thank you, Mr. Sayed. I've always wondered why are the numbers in Africa so low. Estelle, go have a look at the distribution of IVM across the African continent. Marie Olivier, Doctor, hi all, I'm a medical practitioner, and the polarization between colleagues is absolutely crazy. Jacqueline Assam, why is government privatizing the jabs so they don't have to be responsible? Excellent comments here coming in from our audience, and Dr. Jardine correcting himself, it's colloidal silver. Quite a few comments coming through, and we'll continue to read them, your comments, and in particular your questions. That's what we want. Moving on to the next round of questions. That's question number 4. 2 FDA scientists recently resigned, panel, because they oppose the politicization of the entire narrative and the jabs and the CDC. They oppose lucrative booster shots, and they oppose unnecessary shots on children. What is your party's position on experimental shots for children from 6 months up? And what will you do to stand on that position for our children and our youth? Mr. Imam just popped out, so we'll move to Mr. Swart first. Mr. Swart, what is your party's position on experimental shots for children, and what will you do to stand on that position?
It's absolutely unnecessary, and it is absolutely disgraceful. We see today that in South Africa there are experimental vaccines on certain of our children, and I think that this has to be opposed in the strongest possible method. And of course, the question whether having the Sinovac experiment from 6 months to 17 years is what money is being offered to the parents of these children to allow them to have these experiments, and why are Africans being experimented upon? This we must oppose, but let's take a step back. Let's even consider masks for children at schools and the impact that that has on their health. We need to understand that that has a very negative impact, sitting 6-7 hours with a mask that isn't even protecting you. And when you consider, and I'm sure the doctors on board here will agree with me, that children have a very high level of natural immunities, and that it is totally unnecessary, and it's absolutely disgraceful and disgusting, and we've got to take a strong stance together as society. We've got to stand up and oppose this in the strongest possible methods, as well as litigating on these issues. We've allowed masks to be imposed on schools and school children. Now we are allowing this experimentation to take place. We cannot allow it to continue. It's time for society to stand up and say, draw a line in the sand and say, so far and no further. And it's very important. Dr. Mann spoke about the narrative. We've got to meet the narrative, because we know that media is being controlled. And thank you, Shabnam, for this type of voice, the alternative media voices. We've got to set up alternative media voices. We've got to stop the fear-mongering. The first speech in Parliament, when it was the first case in South Africa, I said, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Let us stand up on that truth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Swart. Moving on then to Mr. Nyaku. What is your party's position on experimental jabs on children 6 months up, and of course for teenagers? That's been approved as well by the authorities. And importantly, what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's a fact that experimental vaccines for children are absolutely unnecessary. The children are less likely to be infected with COVID-19 when exposed to it. So in South Africa, there are no records of kids developing symptoms when infected with COVID-19. So nobody actually can show me the hospital that has ever admitted a number of young kids with COVID-19. So no COVID-19 death records of young people from across the country. That is a fact. It is completely irresponsible for our president, the entire cabinet, NCCC, National Coronavirus Command Council, and all vaccines-obsessed political parties in South Africa to clap hands when the helpless kids are made human subjects to experimental vaccines. So the mother of these kids should, under any circumstances, know that they do not own the lives of these kids, but have a responsibility to protect them. If physical or mental suffering and injuries to these kids do happen, their mothers will still enjoy their daily activities with no harm, but the kids will be suffering. So about the youth being in vaccination program, I would say a non-caring government out of the blue flag is caring. So we know that nearly 80% of the youth in the country is unemployed. So this is a major stance that should be taken by the government into consideration. Employ the youth. How do you improve working conditions, or how do you create jobs while we are faced with vicious cycles of lockdown? That is uncalled for. This government is not progressive. It doesn't care about the needs of the young people. It's not transparent. It's uncaring. It is in fact corrupt.
Mr. Nyaku, I can't disagree with you, but what will the POA do about these shots that are being aimed at children and teenagers? What's the plan?
So we are already on the ground. We have amplified our voice, and we are appealing to our mothers who are actually giving an ear to this corrupt government to have their kids being used as human subjects. So we have been moving from one township to the other, from one rural area to the other, appealing to the mothers not to agree to this experimental jabs for their children, because I know that there could be money that is used to bribe the mothers to donate their children for experimental vaccines. So they should be extra alert.
Thank you, Mr. Nyaku. And just to mention, to be constitutionally on point, that we're also talking to the fathers as much as we're talking to the mothers as well. Ms. Abdool, what is your party's position on experimental jabs on babies 6 months up and approval for shots on teenagers 12 years up? And what will you do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
Infanticide. And we are also aware of the fact that, as the previous speakers mentioned, that money does play a role here. If somebody comes to you and say, we are offering you for the next 2 years food, whatever, education for your children, just let us make use of your child to see if this is, because they are becoming very apparent. They're not hiding anymore. They're telling us it's a trial vaccination. At first it was, other words that was used, and I might sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this has been coming on for a while. It's not now that they just decided on the spot to start jabbing children. They have been hinting for months now with certain words that was being uttered by Panyaza Lisufi, and also forms that were given to parents months ago, very hiding a few sentences and just changing a few wording, but actually wanting to get access to our children. So we are completely against it, because it seems like the initial narrative or the initial objective was not met. A certain amount of jabs was supposed to go out. It hasn't happened, because people are being made aware of the fact that this is wrong, and now they're rolling it out to the children. So what have we been doing? Well, we've started a Hands Off Our Kids campaign, because it's nice to do all of the talking inside and going online and so on, but we have to go out in the street, as Mr. Nyaku said. Go out, go to the parents, speak to the parents, and just create an awareness to say that this is wrong. Your child, we don't know what's going to happen to your child. The government doesn't know what's going to happen. The manufacturers of the jabs doesn't know what's going to happen. You are literally sending your child like a little sheep to be slaughtered.
Thank you, Ms. Abdool. Mr. Sayed, let's just put you on mute there. Fatima. Mr. Sayed, what is your party's position on experimental jabs on children 6 months up, as well as the approval for shots on teenagers 12 years up? And what will your party do to stand on that position? You have 2 minutes.
I think I'll defer back to the Constitution, where it says you have a right to self-determination, basically, right? And I think parents have a right to choose whether they want to vaccinate their children or not. But I think it's clear for us in understanding that government, and government, when I say government, I mean in terms of leadership, needs to lead us in the correct direction. A clear understanding needs to be derived as to why are you now giving children vaccines. We must be clear that vaccines expire, right? And once you started rolling out from the elderly first, and you've come into the 40s and the 50s, and you're coming down the line, we now are led to believe that you now want to vaccinate children because you have vaccines and no one's coming in to take them. So now you're saying, okay, let's open it up for the children. And that's cause for concern for us, because if we now go in and start testing things on our youth that are the future of our country, and if it doesn't work and it backfires, then we have a major problem at the end of the day. And that's of great cause for concern for us. I am saying, in no uncertain terms, that government needs to have a clear COVID response plan. What are we doing as a country? Let's leave the international community alone, but we also learn from best practice. What has worked in other countries? What hasn't worked? I mean, ivermectin has worked remarkably. We've been using it in our outreach teams. We've seen it work. People don't end up in hospitals if they take ivermectin within the first 5 days of them getting symptomatic. So it's there, and those things are there, right? What we're saying is that we need to lead our people in the correct direction. As much as we have a right to self-determination, leaders in community need to stand up and say that we will not allow our children to be vaccinated simply for the fact that our government is not leading us and giving us a clear understanding of why these children need to be vaccinated. Have you tested in hospitals to say that people that have been vaccinated in this particular area are so many thousand people, and the people coming into hospital currently that are dying of COVID-19 are non-vaccinated? Has that been passed on to the community at large to say that these are the various reasons based on best practice that you need to be vaccinated because there's evidence of it? There is no evidence. You just come on to...
What is the ACC's plan? What will you do to stand on this important position, Mr. Sayed?
With all due respect, we're advising every single parent through all our platforms that exist to say that do not allow your children to be vaccinated if you yourself haven't been vaccinated. Don't use your child as a guinea pig. You rather go in front yourself. And any parent would tell you that. They'd walk in front of a bus for their children. So that's what we say.
Thank you, Mr. Sayed. Moving on to take a couple of comments here before our next round of questions. Marina Muhlberg-Smith, you don't believe you've been lied to and brainwashed because you've been lied to and brainwashed. Good post of a Saturday, of course, that's your Worldwide Freedom Rally. Suzanne de Sousa says, Discovery says jabs are safe and effective, yet they won't cover any hospitalization or injuries from the jabs. How much have they been paid? Fadia bint Ismail, other medical professionals who are against this are victimized. It's sad. Mr. Manzoor trying to get back into studio there. Peter Munns, there are only 28 cabinet ministers in this country that dictate policies to 65 million people. They've declared war with house arrest, that military lockdown and the destruction of 34 sectors of the economy since March of 2020. COGTA controls the country and this is accepted. Why don't we unite and drain the swamp, the human rights abuse, the crime against humanity, and this is how it needs to be approached. Lots of comments coming through here. So thank you very much to our very engaged audience. We'll try to get to all of these very important comments. Remember to keep sharing this conversation, interview, and broadcast across all of your platforms. A reminder then again to register any negative effects of the jab on the Surveyors platform. People talking about victims that they know of who've taken these jabs and what they're actually going through. Let's look at a couple more comments. Talking about doctors, people who have taken the jab because their doctors have highly recommended it and how they've suffered as a result. Chris, money has always taken precedence over first do no harm in the pharmaceutical and surgical landscapes. Data is often cooked. I mean, that's a valid point. We know these industries have a history of fraud, corruption, racketeering, harm, price fixing, and the lot. Dr. Ivan Jardine, children should be seen and not hurt. This amounts to child sacrifice. Rusty J, Fatima is right. They've been testing the waters for months. This is an abomination. Protect our children at all costs. Estelle Mansfield, well said, Mr. Nyaku. Government and select scientific bodies should show us the real world evidence and data of infection and deaths in children. Leave the children alone. Darren van Dranen talking about the withdrawal of the PCR test due to ineffectiveness. Mike Peace, when two specialists in the medical field have different views on the same subject, there's something misaligned. Why can't these specialists not be resolved by debate? Doesn't happen. Well, Mr. Pete, I'm very happy to facilitate those debates. Again, reminders about Saturday's Worldwide Freedom Rally. Marie Olivier, my problem is that the trial is rolled out in the poorest places and offering people food, money, etc. in exchange for your child's health. This poorest of the poor also have no access to the internet to be able to access information on what's really going on and how people are suffering. Couple more comments. Saskia Langeveld, no one will touch my children. Hoor me mooi. Nikki Buerta talks about the Danish study, again, a very important comment there. Melanie Scott about mainstream media being silent, and George Titus about the Great Barrington Declaration regarding focused protection during the jab. George Titus, THJ, and similar civil society organizations should consider partnering with these parties to keep abreast of how the opposition in other countries are progressing with their feedback. Very well aware. Thank you for that one. Dr. Rapiti, in my practice over the last 3 months, I've seen more than 5 children with a flu, which clearly demonstrate that children recover very well from the infection with no complications. Why is the government going on the immoral path of jabbing children? Mark Bind, my housekeeper's 11-year-old daughter was jabbed against her will at school today without parents' consent. And of course, there is a great debate about whether teenagers even can consent, whether they have the cognitive ability to consent without their parents' involvement. And it's a really important debate as well. Jean Herborn, is the rolling out of the jab in the pandemic not creating waves due to shedding? Very good question, and there's plenty of evidence in that regard. I'm trying to keep up with all of the comments, and I'm going to ask our panel post the show if you can engage the comments on the broadcast on both Facebook or YouTube. I think that will also really be appreciated by the public and civil society who are listening and trying to trust political parties. We'll take one last one from Jenali Hardy. We all know that this is an illegal state of emergency. We need to mute somebody's mic there. There are many alternative treatments, hence parents should not have the right to jab their children. Moving on from there, Mr. Imam, this question is for you. A few months ago, news emerged about Pfizer trying to capture South African state assets as collateral for shots. That includes the embassies, the military, the Reserve Bank, billions in cash, and of course, blanket immunity for any harm suffered, or even if they don't deliver or their product is delayed. Now, Argentina and Brazil, as we know, were open about this demand from a corporate. Former Minister Imtiaz stated that Pfizer backed down on these demands for South African assets. Hashtag Pfizer leaks revealed to what extent countries' sovereignty are being subverted by multinational corporations. But given that there are illegal NDAs in place, Mr. Imam, how do we protect our country's resources from capture by big pharma and friends? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just start off by saying that, you know, the good news about ivermectin is that even the Botswana Doctors Union have now approved that ivermectin for use. So, you know, there's good stories around ivermectin all over the world. But coming back to this, I think, again, Honorable Swart will agree with me that we dealt with this extensively in the portfolio committee when news broke out of the demands that were being made by pharmaceutical giants, you know, on the assets of sovereign states and things. And of course, Minister Mkhize admitted that demands were made. However, those demands were dropped by these pharmaceutical giants. And he gave us the assurance that, of course, South Africa was not going to buy into that and not going to allow that, of course. Yeah, but, you know, we must also be mindful. A lot of what we find out in this country, we only find out when it's too late, when everything is done and dusted. So the risks are still attached to whether they are giving us, you know, first-hand information and they are really being open about it and transparent about it. And that's the problem that we have. Because the question that arises is with the demands that they've made. Remember, they started with no compensation fund demand, which is still not kicked in our country in any event. But you know, these are some of the demands that they've been making, particularly, you know, in sovereign state, and that appears to be a serious problem. Now, how is it that with such demands being made, suddenly you've just dropped those demands? So, you know, that's what makes us suspicious, and based on what's happening in the country, one has to worry about it. You might just hear something when it's too late. But we've been given the assurance by former Minister Mkhize and his team that, of course, we did not accede to that request. And it's definitely not going to happen, and South Africa will not buy in as far as that is concerned.
A quick follow-up question, Mr. Imam. Our economy has been shattered, at least for the 90%. If you're unable to pay the exorbitant costs of these products, we are at risk of losing our sovereign assets. What should we be doing about that?
There's no doubt about it. You know, we're going to what, 95% Our debt to GDP ratio is going up to almost 95% shortly. So we're going to have a fiscal cliff soon in the country. And over and above the fact that what this pandemic has done, and the pricing structure alone, if you look at these the vaccines in the country, is shocking. So you can look at the added pressure it's going to put our country itself in over and above many other countries. And it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of survival. And would a depressed economy as such as we have in our country, and with high levels of corruption and looting and everything put together, it means that we're sitting in a very difficult position, and it's going to take you a very long time to get it right. But over and above that, you know, if you look at the amount of money that has been spent, and let me also say this, if you look at the Johnson & Johnson vaccines for that matter, did you know that not even the Minister of Health, and I'm not sure if Honorable Swart is aware, but I think you are, sir, you know, that even the Minister of Health did not negotiate these things. They had nothing to do with these things. And if we remember, there were also information that unfolded that there were certain countries that were willing to give us vaccines free of charge, and we did not take those either. So, you know, there's a whole lot that appears to be going on, and you are absolutely correct that it can affect the economy of this country based on the high prices we've been paying and things for this vaccine, and we've put in a situation where we have to take it. And if there are those in this country that are in collusion with these pharmaceutical companies, then of course it means we are gone. We are history.
Absolutely. Mr. Imam, moving to you, Mr. Swart, leading in nicely from the response from Mr. Imam. Do parliamentary parties really have a say on what the fiscus of our country is used for during COVID-19 in particular, from the scandal of the missing 500 billion, etc., to 283 million being paid to COVAX, to 19.3 billion being invested over the next 3 years into risky, ineffective, and obscenely expensive shots? Are political parties consulted about this expenditure? If not, why not? And what can we as civil society do to take back the purse strings? You have 2 minutes.
Well, firstly, of course, what can we do to take back the purse strings is vote the ANC out of government. Because sadly, whilst we as the opposition parties, and I want to commend the Honourable Shaik Emam as well and other opposition parties that try their very best. We tried to expose all the state capture and corruption. We saw the Speaker of Parliament apologizing to the nation at the Zondo Commission for state corruption. I said, don't apologize in my name. I was one of those that exposed the corruption at Eskom. So when it comes to the fiscus, yes, to a certain degree, the Parliament is involved. We pass the appropriation of every cent that is spent. Parliament passes that. And so at the end of the day, no parliamentarian can say they did not know that the money was being spent. But sadly, when we raise the issues, such as the outrageous theft of PPE funds last year, those billions of rands that were stolen, and I warned President Ramaphosa, I said, and he said, no, they're going to keep a hawk's eye over those funds. And I knew that it was with the tender processes, those funds are going to be stolen. So we are deeply concerned from the ACDP side that we as opposition members, we raise these issues continually. But you must also remember the situation we faced with the Disaster Management Act. Parliament, to a large degree, has been sidelined. We've got no say over the contents of the regulations. When the expenditures, and I think the Honourable Imam is correct, a lot of those expenditures and those contracts were signed in secrecy. A lot of the contents of those contracts with the international pharmaceutical companies, we cannot get the details. So there is a degree of accountability. Yes, South Africa is said to be very open and accountable with the budget process. But at the end of the day, the majority party rubber stamps the budget, notwithstanding the opposition's opposition to wasteful expenditure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swart. I think this is a question that civil
Okay, I don't know what happened. I think she's coming back.
maybe go ahead.
All right.
Oh, yeah, I think.
We're
and
back.
you
Thank
are
you.
back. I was just
I'm
going
back.
to start ad-libbing.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Mr. Swart. I think that's a very important explanation for civil society to understand what's going on in terms of the subversion of democracy, the control of the public purse, but also responsibility on us to step up to the plate and stand back and take our power. Just going to ask you to mute your mics again there. The next question is for you, Mr. Nyaku. Let's talk about conflicts of interest in our healthcare system. While information has emerged around who funds the people making decisions about our health and about COVID-19 in particular, there appear to be no mechanisms for political parties to vet these decision makers. Are we as civil society to blame for not demanding this? And how do we ensure that anyone with any conflict of interest is never making decisions about our health? We have 2 minutes.
Yeah, this is a complex question actually to answer, but I will say South Africa is burdened by deeply embedded socio-economic challenges. So international mafias will always take advantage of the situation. So in our constitution, we've got chapter 2. That's where we find Bill of Rights. So section 32 of Bill of Rights actually says any member of the public can access the information. So every member of the public has got the right to access any information held by the state. So our state is currently making dozens of loans, and as such, the loan conditions are kept secret. So no member of the public is able to access that. So I'm not a member of parliament. I don't know what is happening, but I believe that every member of parliament is aware that there are loans that were given to our state, and I'm not sure if they do have a copy of loan conditions. That could be discussed at a later stage. But I'm worried about the donation that was made by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to SAHPRA, South African Health Product Regulatory Authority, because this is the institution that approves the vaccines that come to our shores. I mean, if we critically and comprehensively analyze the whole thing, these people make a donation to SAHPRA, which approves vaccines in the country. And again, they are heavily involved in the manufacturing business of these vaccines. So there are plain complete conflict of interest here. That is why you have a situation whereby some political party marches at SAHPRA offices to push the SAHPRA to approve a certain vaccine. This is totally uncalled for.
So Mr. Nyaku, as a political party, what would you put forward as a proposal to Parliament to say that any scientist, any regulatory authority, anyone in any position of power with a conflict of interest or any tie to the pharmaceutical industry should never be allowed to make decisions regarding our health? What would you put that kind of proposal forward? What would it look like?
Yeah, we want our voice to be heard. We want to amplify our voice. Our voice actually in National Assembly. We are going to write to the Speaker of the Parliament. We want to know exactly what is happening in the country, because South African government is broke. So it is ready to accept any donation from whoever who can tamper with the affairs of the country. So as POA, we are glad that now we are faced with this satanic situation. That is where we will have a huge voice within societal context, because we need answers. We need to put the National Assembly under pressure. We need to put SAHPRA under pressure, as well as the cabinet and the president, because we cannot allow a situation whereby there are plain conflict of interest at play, and there is no voice at all. We are not in government as of yet, but it does not mean we cannot have a voice. We've got a right to access any information held by the government.
Thank you, Mr. Nyaku. Ms. Abdool, your question: unemployment stands at 34.4%. It's gone up. Meanwhile, just 250 million has been set aside to compensate shot victims, many of whom are poor and can only access our broken public hospital system. This includes Trevor Musgrove fighting for his life after a J&J second shot trial. That's the same J&J that was found guilty of cancer-causing baby powder. Of course, SAPRA has a duty to say that not one death is related to the shots, relying on autopsies that, again, our poor cannot afford. So what is your view on our government giving shot manufacturers blanket immunity from claims? And secondly, is this a right they have without having called for a referendum? You have 2 minutes.
Follow the money. Follow the money. That is the main thing. Okay, so the fact that they have given blanket immunity to all these people and them requiring the immunity means that they are aware of the fact that there is a risk. You know something might happen, but you are immune to any of the things that might happen. The fact that there's no referendum by this government makes a lot of sense. Why would you have a referendum that would vote against what you are planning to do? And that is why they did not have a referendum. Someone asked there, have they been jabbed? I don't know who of the ministers have been jabbed. So by the way, the United Independent Movement is not in parliament as yet, as Mr. Nyaku had also indicated regarding their party. But we're also making our voices heard. My suggestion would be that all opposition parties, these parties on the screen included, must stand together and apply for the necessary courts to start a referendum, because the onus lies on the people. Because we know there's a lot of corruption and stealing and stuff happening within parliament, so they will not have referendums. We as the people outside the community and the citizens of South Africa must do that, because this government, which includes the ANC and the EFF, I will name these parties, they are pushing their own agenda under different guises. Unemployment is in their favor. Keep them poor, keep them dependent, keep them as slaves forever, because then you can come back and say, no jab, no SASSA. It's all about control. So my suggestion is that we all stand together as multiple parties and the citizens of South Africa and initiate a referendum. Hopefully there are still judges that are not captured, and they will give us the necessary permission to do that, because that's the only way. This government needs to step out.
Thank you, Ms. Abdool. Of course, Sean Vitek said, I heard now, even to appear in court, you have to be jabbed or shot using every way possible. That's certainly happening as well. So the judiciary and their independence is certainly going to come into question. Mr. Sayed, your question: your party is branded as an activism party, from service delivery issues to crime, all of which government continues to fail on, which is, of course, highly profitable for those who seek to benefit from these failures. On top of that, government is talking about booster shots that will no doubt death slave our country's people for decades to come. What, in your view, is a proper budget for preventing or treating COVID-19, which many experts say is here to stay, and which experts like Professor Geert van der Bosch say is going to mutate because of mass jabination during a pandemic? What, in your view, is a proper budget for preventing or treating COVID-19? You have 2 minutes.
I think, just to speak to it very quickly, and if we're speaking to the mutation of the virus while we're being vaccinated and jabbed and all of that, right? We must, firstly, let's go back to 2019 when we started out with our lockdowns. Our government was quite clear in their stance in the beginning, where they said that we're going into lockdown to create a state of readiness and come up with a COVID response plan. That is nowhere to be found. Where are these field hospitals? Where are all of these things that we were promised in the beginning? So let's go back there. And if we're speaking about a budget, right? You just mentioned just now that we've got a broken healthcare system in this country. How do we devise a budget for a broken healthcare system? So what we are saying is it must be quite clear that government needs to fund all our doctors in terms of them coming together in a clear COVID response plan. And this is where I come to saying, let us stick in our lane. We have doctors in this country. Let us formalize them. Let us bring them together in unison to say that this is the COVID response plan, and we will do it through the private sector. Where are the fields and where are those hospitals that we need? Let's get that in place. Quite rightly so, you lobbied very hard for the use of ivermectin to be used in this country, right? But we stopped there. We've dropped the ball. We need to have these field hospitals starting to test the use of ivermectin to make sure that vaccines are really not the only option. There are different options that are out there. So we're saying that a budget needs to be implemented, and that budget can only be devised by the private sector saying that this is what we need, in terms of civil society saying that these are the needs of the community by far and large. We've seen by far in all areas of community, outreach teams and NGOs stepping up to the plate, buying oxygen machines, going out there with private ambulances, purchasing ambulances. Why? Because firstly, the private sector had shut their doors. They closed down their hospitals per se to say that we will have a tent outside to deal with COVID. And that's 20 beds. So when you go out to a private hospital, even if you have medical aid, and that's controlled by Big Pharma in any case, right? You go out there and they say, we've got no space for you. So you're left to die at home. So it became the challenge of community activists to now step up to the plate and say, how do we now start treating you at home, making hospital beds available, doing all of those little things to try and get by. And that's the cause for concern for us. If we leave a budget to government, ultimately it's going to end up like 2019, wherein nothing's going to happen. The medical society, the medical fraternity of the country needs to come together in unison, decide on a way forward, come up with the proper COVID response plan, and say this is what we need as society, and you government need to give us the budget for that.
Thank you, Mr. Sayed, for that comment on the budget. And of course, we know that very little has been invested into repurposed medicines because novel therapies is where the money is at. We're on to the last round of our questions. Let's take a couple of comments. Bobby saying referendum is all well and good, but you have to educate the people. Nikki Bueta, yes, 2 rules of investigating: follow the money and look at what is not being shown or said. What are they trying to hide? Some very interesting comments here. Shirley Miles, take your kids out of school, become self-reliant, stop the dependency. That's where government thinks they have a permanent hold on us. Melanie Scott, when Dr. Earling wrote a letter to the president, why didn't the media say anything or follow up? But yet COVID gets blasted all over the news. Melanie, certainly independent media has been covering the letter by Dr. Herman Earling, to which there's been no response from the president yet. Saskia Langeveld, we have homeschooled our children since forever. It's unbelievable how our homeschool community has grown in the last year and a half. And a question here from Jacqueline Assam talking about the GDP, fake news. Why ignore people's views about the negativity of the jabs? Why do we have 2 different kinds of jabs? One is once-off, the other is, I think, a 2-shot. Renee Breitenbach, why is the NCCC still running the country? When a court case was won against them last year in the High Court, they were declared unconstitutional, but they merely ignore this and carry on with their tyranny. Peter Munns, again, talking about corruption here, quite a detailed comment. You'll be able to see it in the comment section. Of course, our guests will make every endeavor to engage your comments post-show. Dr. Peter Munns talking about 3 trillion being stolen, young status, recession, 4 trillion in debt, etc. Certainly some very important comments coming through from a very informed South African audience. Kubeshni Reddy, can health and life insurance companies force clients to vaccinate by increasing their premiums? Well, that's just it. That's what forcing actually does. Melanie Scott, citizens need to stand up, but we do have the problem that vaccinated discriminate against the unvaccinated. So have a look at those comments and questions. There's so many of them, it's hard to read all, but we certainly value every single comment and question. Right, to the last round of questions, and this one goes out to all of our panelists this evening. given the positions you've expressed during the course of this interview, this conversation, this broadcast, and warnings against the shot by global experts like Dr. Tess Lowry, Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Mike Yaden, Dr. Robert Malone, who is the inventor of mRNA, and of course, our most courageous South African doctors, is there clear potential for an alliance between your parties? And if that's the case, what is the call out to other political parties who share the same position as you on rejecting medical apartheid in South Africa? So is there potential for an alliance? And what is your call out to other political parties who hold the same position? Mr. Emam, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Shabnam. But before I go there, I just wanted to clarify a few things here very quickly. First of all, there was never 500 billion rand. And this is misinterpreted in the media. And I think this was clear politicking by government itself. It was a 500 billion rand relief package. Government does not have 500 billion rand sitting around there. There was no five. But of that 200 billion alone was a guarantee to Nedbank to issue loans to small businesses. And that's where all the breakdown comes. So there was basically only about 100 billion rand, 115 billion in monetary terms. That's the first thing. Secondly, I want to also say, it's not Parliament where the corruption and looting. It must be very careful what we say. Parliament is a legislative body. This is where we conduct oversight and things. We appropriate resources. It's the government structures where these lootings and things that generally take place. But coming back to your point, I think it's very important. But I think some of your callers alluded to something very important. And I think you also spoke about that, Shabnam. And that is what we're trying to get. No.
You with us, Mr. Emam?
Okay. Yes, I've come back. I don't know what went wrong there. You know, we're trying to get, and again, Honorable Swart will agree with me, to get a debate, which is what you also alluded to, between those that are pushing this narrative of the vaccine and those that have got the evidence that it does not work, and the issue of ivermectin and a whole lot. And we just can't get it. While the department has now agreed and we've started the initiative, we're now gone into research. So whether that is really going to come, but there's a reluctance to be able to debate this because some of your callers are talking about exactly the same thing. So people can make informed decisions as far as that. They don't want to do that, and of course for obvious reasons. But lastly, I want to say, civil society, political parties, NGOs must all come together because we have a common fight for the common good of the people of this country. And if we are not convinced what we are doing is in the best interest of the people that we serve as public representatives, then we must agree to disagree and put our differences aside and come together. I'll give you a good example. You know, our policies might be different to the ACDP, but you can see on the issues of ivermectin and the issue of vaccine that we're on the same page and we're standing side by side and fighting the fight. So I think that's what is important, that parties and organizations must come together for the common good of the people and this country. But lastly, I want to say, a very dangerous thing here is particularly smaller parties get swallowed by big parties with coalitions and you start towing the line as to what they want you to do. And that's what I want us all to be very, very mindful. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Emam. Mr. Swart, is there potential for an alliance between the parties on the panel today? And if so, what is your call to other political parties who share the same position? You have 2 minutes. Mr. Swart, you need to unmute yourself.
Indeed, there's always space to work together on a matter of such massive interest, and we welcome discussions. You've already seen how well we and the Honorable Shaik Emam of the NFP and the ACDP, we work very well together on the Health Committee, where we try to hold the Health Minister SOPRA accountable. And we've worked very well on the ivermectin matter together. So there is space for organizations, for political parties who share a common interest to stand together. And it's crucial now. It's crucial for us to, we've got the Saturday, the Worldwide Freedom Rally, where I've stood outside Parliament objecting to the lockdowns. We need to start showing our stand, we need to support one another, civil society, we need to support alternative media resources, stop the narrative, we need court action. A referendum isn't necessarily going to help. We've got to bring court action like we did in the High Court when it came to the ivermectin matter and SAPRA buckled down. I saw one comment about that it was, the regulations were found unconstitutional. Unfortunately, in the Liberty Network case, that was overruled by the Supreme Court of Appeal, as I'm sure you're aware of that, Shabnam. But we've got to come with a very strong stance and unite. And when more and more people stand up against this tyranny, then as the former President Nelson Mandela said, let freedom reign. It's about freedom. It's about the victory of our constitutional democracy that is at threat now. So we need to stand together as much as possible. And many of the parties represented here will hopefully get councillors into municipalities now with the local government elections. But it is crucial at this stage that we start exercising our voice, because we only hear one narrative. And when we stand up in Parliament on this issue, we are decried and laughed at, like it was last week when our leader, Reverend Beshwe, took on the President of the Nation on mandatory vaccines. But at least that voice is being heard at the highest voice of Parliament, the highest representative level. And we will not keep quiet. We will continue to fight the good fight. Thank you so much, Shabnam.
Thank you, Mr. Swart. Mr. Nyaku, do you see clear potential for an alliance of sorts between the parties on the panel today? If so, what is your call to other political parties who share the same position?
Yeah, I will commence by saying fighting a globalist agenda is not a child's play. It's like a mountain to climb. So alliance, in my view, is unavoidable. So multi-negotiations ought to commence. I'm talking of only political parties that possess similar stance against medical apartheid. So this is not about individual parties or personal glory, but collective fight against, collective fight that affects anyone. I'm saying everyone, because most people do not see the light. They think the government cares. So we are together in this fight. If you remember very well, so POA held anti-lockdown press briefing on the 26th of August. I said that a couple of minutes ago. It was supported by dozens of organizations. So it's possible if we are on the same page. It's possible if we identify the destiny that we must go to. So I want to say we went to union buildings on the 30th of August. We were many there. So unfortunately, others did not make it. But it shows that if we table this issue for discussion, certainly we could, the exercise could bear the fruits. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyaku. Ms. Abdool, are you seeing potential for an alliance between the parties on the panel today? And if so, what is your call out to other political parties that hold the same position? You have 2 minutes.
Yes, definitely. May I just also comment on what Mr. Swart said? I saw the video clip of Reverend Meshu in Parliament, and I was thinking to myself, if only there were more voices at that moment shouting and encouraging him, muting the negative noises from the other parties that were actually booing him. But we commend you for that, and thank you very much. And all the other, look, we are a very new party. We are literally not even a month old. We have started off as a movement, and now we are a party, and we are a party to be reckoned with. We would definitely want to form an alliance with the experienced people who knows how things are done and so on, because we have a common enemy, and that is the system that is currently putting our people under lockdown, perpetuating poverty and all the negativity. So it would be very foolish if we would not want to form an alliance. So definitely would want to do that, and do it very strategically, because I can see the strengths from the different parties. We cannot only address this from one side, we have to do it very strategically from different angles and see to it that we get the results that we want. Because I've heard, and I hope it's not true, that there is this notion, and you will be able to help me, that they say no jab, no vote. So that can become a problem if it is true. And I hope it is not true, because then it will affect all of us. But yeah, definitely an alliance.
Thank you, Ms. Abdool. Mr. Sayed, are you seeing potential for an alliance here? And if so, what is your call out to other political parties that share the same position?
I think in terms of political parties and coalitions, we've got to be clear in understanding. Ultimately, if we're all having the same problem, what is the difference in all of us speaking to it in one voice? There's no issues around that, right? It's not as though one captures the other. It's about speaking the same language and coming together in unison in understanding that this is the path we want forward. The question arises is that if we're currently having this current debate, who are the parties that are pushing this agenda and why are they pushing the agenda? That needs to be clarified. We need to be clear about which parties are pushing the agenda. And if we can't identify that, or the reasons behind why they're pushing the agenda and why they're against saying that it's freedom of expression and you have a right to do whatever you want to do, we're not going to push this agenda, then we need to ask questions. And ultimately, it comes down to, if we have the same problem, we need to stand together, fight the same fight, irrespective of our party political differences and differences in different policies. That's a separate issue for another day, and we can discuss that in another climate. But currently, the problem at hand is we need to lead the people. And if we are leading the people in a direction that is swaying based on our own differences, then we have a problem as politicians, right? So I'm saying any party that has the same point of view in terms of this vaccine and how it should be rolled out, we should come together, discuss the issue, come up with a strategy and progress that forward. And anyone opposing that point of view needs to put and table the issues as to why they oppose the issue. And if it comes down to something that is monetarily afforded to certain parties to push that agenda, then we need to be transparent to the public that that's what's going on. And we shouldn't lie to anyone and say that that's not the case. And they have validity in their argument or whatever the case may be. But we need clarity on the issues before we go into coalition, you know. So that's where we're coming from with regard to coalitions. We for it, we're all for it. We should lobby the same thing. And the biggest thing about everything is if everyone in their own capacity does the same thing together, we become impactful. Let us not do it all dividedly. Let's stand together. All of us do the same thing. If we're running projects, let's exchange those ideas and say, let's we do the same thing on the same day at the same time, and let's push the same agenda so that it's seen, instead of us doing it in our small little clusters wherever we might be. And that's what we're calling for. And that's what I think a coalition is. A coalition is first discussing things, understanding it, coming up with solutions, and doing it together. That's all it really comes down to. Thanks, Shabnam.
Thank you, Mr. Sayed. So on to our last question. Again, I must emphasize that there are so many comments in the broadcast, both on the Facebook page, my page, as well as the YouTube, if that's still up. So I would really request our panelists to make some time this evening and tomorrow to engage with those comments and questions that we actually didn't get to. But here's our last question for this conversation. And certainly there will be follow-up conversations. I certainly intend on bringing other political parties and civil society organizations into conversations together. This Saturday is the Worldwide Freedom Rally Day around South Africa and around the world. The people of our world are calling for an end to an ineffective and punishing lockdown that only serves to widen the ever-growing mountain between the 10% and the rest of us. And they want safe, effective, and cheap treatments that work. They demand a better way to live. Assuming you, as a political party representative, was allowed to speak for 120 seconds in front of civil society, the people, on moving from the Great Reset to the greater good for humanity, what will your message be standing there? And what is your call to action, Mr. Imam?
Well, let me start off by saying that on behalf of the NFP, our point has been very clear, and we'll reiterate this. That first of all, we are not convinced that indeed the vaccines are effective whatsoever in the country. So that I think is the most important thing. I think the other thing is that the Constitution guarantees and protects human rights and your right to choose, and your right. And in this case, if people decide that they do not want to vaccinate, then so be it. Our argument will be very clear that government does not have the authority and the right to force people to vaccinate, to carry passports, to restrict their movement into restaurants, let alone going outside the country, but also inside the country. But very importantly, when you talk about the lockdown, and this is an argument I've repeatedly been putting even with the president when we normally meet him in our leaders of political parties with him. What is the purpose of lockdowns and regulations when there is no compliance in any effect? And law enforcement is nowhere to be seen to ensure that people are compliant. So you can move from one level to another level to another level. People are not complying. What's the purpose of putting in the regulation? So for us, we believe that it has been counterproductive. We know livelihoods have been lost, lives have been lost, and that unless you remove this lockdowns completely, and I think in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, we are moving to level 1 in any event. Okay. But more importantly, allow the people their freedom of movement, allow businesses to operate. Do not restrict these restaurants and things because many of them have closed and others are going to also close. You're not going to bring this economy back on track if you continue in this. Government is with corruption and looting and limited resources right now. We have a serious problem. So we're saying, do away with the lockdown. Let it allow the people to go back to live their normal lives. There is treatment that is available. Allow them to take that treatment. Allow them to choose even ivermectin if that's their choice together with other medication and it's working for them. That is their right. So allow the people the freedom to choose in terms of their rights, which is enshrined in the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Imam. Mr. Swart, assuming that a political party is given the space to speak in a civil society event, we know many of the people around our world are very wary of political parties, but let's assume you were standing there. You were given 120 seconds to deliver a message to the people of our country. What is your message? What is the call to action?
Well, firstly, I'd say as the ACDP, I've stood inside Parliament opposing the lockdown, and I've stood outside Parliament as part of demonstrations to oppose the lockdown. And so I would thank all the people that are there, because when government sees people gathering, they take notice. And I would say to them that the narrative that has been promoted worldwide, we need an alternative narrative, and that is freedom of choice. When it comes to our economic well-being and when it comes to our health, it is crucial that we have the freedom of choice when it comes to vaccines, as to whether we should know what the consequences of the vaccines are and have the choice to have it or not. When it came to the lockdowns, the ACDP and all political parties initially supported the lockdowns. But what we've seen since March the 15th last year, the Ides of March, has been the longest and harshest lockdown worldwide. And I would say at that meeting that it is absolutely disgraceful that you have armed soldiers and armed policemen stopping children from building sandcastles on the beaches, whilst our criminals are ravaging our communities, and we've got high levels of GB violence, rapes, murders in 3 months this year. April, May, June, in that lockdown, there were 10,000 rapes. Where are the police that should be prosecuting real criminals and not persecuting people that break and breach these lockdown regulations? I would also say that the data that is being relied on is unreliable. In answer to a question that I put to the Minister of Home Affairs last year, in 1 year, there are more than 430,000 people died in this nation of sicknesses. At that time, 28,000 people purportedly died of COVID-19. That means more than 1,000 people per day are dying of other diseases. And it is time for us to save those lives as well, put attention to that, as well as ending the lockdown and end the curfew that is absolutely disgraceful and is having such a negative impact on our hospitality industries, on our entertainment industries, and on businesses in general. And so I would fully support the lockdown, the calls for the end of the lockdown, and the opposition to any form of mandatory vaccinations, and draw a line in the sand and say so far and no further. Thank you so much, Shabnam.
Thank you, Mr. Swart. Mr. Nyaku, you're standing in front of the Worldwide Freedom Rally. They have decided to give you a loudhailer for 120 seconds only. Talk to them directly. What is your call to action? What is your message?
Lockdowns are vicious. Lockdowns are anti-economic growth. Mandatory masks continue to finish off immune system of the kids and the old. What is the use of mandating vaccines when in fact the fully vaccinated do get COVID? What is the use of adhering to Disaster Management Act regulations when we are told of the fourth wave that is looming? It is a known fact that Disaster Management Act regulations are ineffective. So it is high time that we turn our focus on citizen journalism. Citizen journalism is not like a professional journalism, because professional journalism has taken a different route. Journalism is captured. Mainstream media does not report what is actually happening. So we know for a fact that people who have taken vaccines are dying and they do not want to admit. So SAPRA will, under any circumstances, not link any vaccine death with the vaccine. So POA is saying it will support any cause that is against medical tyranny, any movement that is against devilish lockdown, mandatory masks, mandatory vaccines. Retla supporter at all times, we will be there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyaku, for that one. Ms. Abdool, I'm getting a strange feedback from the background there. Fatima, I'm not sure what that sound is. Let's just try and fix it and we'll come back to you. Mr. Sayed, you're allowed an opportunity in front of an untrusting audience. You're given 120 seconds to talk to people at the Worldwide Freedom Rally. What is your message and what is your call to action?
I think for us, it's quite simple. We totally against the lockdown, because first and foremost, in a country like where we live in, if you cannot police that lockdown and institute it properly, then why in fact have it? So currently we've been through wave 1, 2, 3, and apparently now we are going to be going into wave 4, something to that effect. And we're not sure about all of these waves that are coming, because sometimes I think we're at the beach. At the end of the day, if a lockdown in a country that cannot enforce that lockdown is being instituted and put onto the people, then it shouldn't exist. That's number one, right? But further to that, let us be self-aware, let us be cautious and not reckless about the situation. There is something out there that's killing people by the thousands. That's there. What works? Let's identify what works. Self-awareness. Self-awareness. Let us be self-aware that people are dying. We've lost parents, we've lost siblings, and it became very real after, in the second wave, it became real because now it became people that we actually knew. It was family and friends and relatives in the second wave. In the first wave, it was far between. So there is something that's killing people that's there. So let's not be reckless about this. Yes, lockdown doesn't work because through the lockdown, we went through all of these waves. We are saying, let us be self-aware. Let's look at alternative medication. Let's look at being responsible citizens. Let's clearly get clear knowledge of what works and what does not work. And let us put ourselves into that time frame and that space to say that we now need to normalize. And we need to normalize very quickly. I mean, first and foremost, we've been through lockdown since 2019. We now come in through unrest. And now you want us to recover and still be owing big pharma money for things that we don't really need to pay them for. What are we in fact doing? Now, this automatically, if you put everything together, it does sound like a conspiracy theory. We are living in a conspiracy theory. We don't believe it because we're living it. That's where we are at the moment. So we are saying that lockdown should go away. We don't want it. But people need to be self-aware. They need to be cautious. They need to be preventative. They need to understand that people are getting sick. Why they are getting sick, we don't know why. Those answers need to come from somewhere else. And that's the reality of the situation on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sayed. Lots of comments coming through supporting the idea of an alliance or a coalition. Fatima, I'm still getting that strange sound from your background. I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's bring Mr. Nyaku back into the conversation. We'll come back to you in a sec, Fatima. We will not forget you. A couple of comments here. Menzi Kahudu Maseko, Viva POA. These parties need to get into a coalition immediately. And I must say the support for each and every one of the political parties here today, and some beautiful comments coming through from followers about journalism. And a great big thank you for your participation and for being involved in this conversation. I think also for telling it like it is. That's what our people are looking for. Some fantastic hashtags coming up. South Africa is uniting. Healthy independence for South Africa. Kenako South Africa. Really beautiful comments coming through from South Africans who need hope, but are equally aware and not being able to be treated as sheep. Rusty J says they're getting sick because they're being suffocated by their masks, compromising their lungs. Well, I'll tell you, the scientific colleagues that I have the honor and privilege of communicating and engaging with tell us that there is, in fact, ethylene oxide and graphene oxide on the masks that people are using, and these cause breathing issues and lung issues. In fact, these masks were withdrawn in other countries, I believe, including France and Canada. So if you're wearing a mask that is not a cloth mask, you're running the risk of these chemicals, ethylene oxide and graphene oxide, being on your mask, and that could very well be what's creating breathing problems and landing people in hospital. I do not consent is a very strong message that's coming through. Thank you, Susan Day, for that very important comment there. And appreciation from the public. We do this for humanity, so we appreciate your support. Fatima, let's bring you back in. Let's see if we fix that sound issue. The question again, you're standing in front of the Worldwide Freedom Rally, and for some reason, they've allowed to give politicians 120 seconds to speak. Speak as if you were talking directly to them. What is your message? What is your call to action? Bearing in mind, that's where the real power lies.
Wake up, get educated, find out what is really going on. Do your own research. Do not believe your mainstream media because they are not giving us the truth. Someone said rely on community media. Just be aware, the time of wanting someone else to bring you a solution, a savior, that does not exist. You are the designer of your own life, your own destiny. You must take control of your own life. Be part of the solution. If there is a rally against whatever that is currently infringing on your freedom of movement, freedom of anything, life as you know it, there's a notion of people saying that if these unvaxxed people can just start getting vaxxed, then we will return to normal. I don't even know what that means. That doesn't even make sense. We will never return to normal if all of us have had this jab and we don't know what the results really are. If we see people are dying around us. So what I'm saying is, please tap into where people are making a noise, where people are addressing all of these things. Tap into your political party. Find out what it is that they are doing to improve your life and to address these atrocities. And if push comes to shove and you just get to a T-junction when people say no entry if you don't have a jab, I believe in the masses. The mass movement works. If the masses decide, then okay, then we stay at home. We don't go to the shops. We don't go anywhere until we see that you do what we as the masses want. I always say parliament consists of a few people. Police, SEPs consist of a few people. SANDF is not the majority. We as the citizens, we are the majority. So we can take a stand by just resisting whatever is being dished to us. So do that. Do not be threatened or feel that you are forced. The only way that you can force me to do something is when you put a gun against me, put me against the floor, and then you do it. Other than that, there is no such thing as mandatory, forceful, whatever, because there are laws and, constitutional law, legal law, your human rights law. It is there to protect you. So, use that.
Thank you, Ms. Abdool. A very powerful message there. And again, I'm going to ask our panelists to please interact with our audience on the Facebook page as well as the YouTube channel, if that is still up. Lots of comments I haven't had a chance to get through yet. There have been so many. Dr. Peter Munns talking about medical issues here again, and we'll make that the last comment before we start saying goodbye. People are not dying at home, but in the hospital. This is a doctor. And under the care of these medical practitioners and the medical protocols being used, they need to be put under the spotlight. The panel needs to think about this and question their methods. Thank you very much for the valued and appreciated live stream. We look forward to working together. And let's see, there's the comment again. Thank you, Shabnam, for the truth. Time brings all things to life, and most especially the truth, and we need it now more than ever. Rusty J, stay away from hospitals. Treat yourself at home with IVM and other preventatives. Be informed rather than conform. Generally Hardy, a new era has been born. United, powerful, peaceful protesting. Humor, laughter, and satire work well. Also, e-commerce enterprise, bringing up conflict of interest at SAPRA. Chantal Ruiz, Fatima, we know you're about action, not about words. Some important comments and reminders here from Michael Crofton talking about informed consent, RB bringing up what's happening in Israel, Marion giving thanks to everyone and the doctors who have supported IVM, and Kapil Ramasar saying thank you, Shabnam, and to all of the panelists. At that point, we are going to start saying goodbye to everyone and thanking you for being a part of this conversation today. So thank you again to all the People's Voice guests, Mr. Ahmed Mansoor Sheikh Emam from the NFP, Mr. Stephen Swart from the ACDP, Mr. Billy Nyaku from Party of Action, Ms. Fatima Abdool from the UIM, and Mr. Imtiaz from the ACC. Thank you for joining us and for the People's Voice, but also for trying to be a voice for the people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shabnam, and for allowing us to be part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. Remember to continue sharing this conversation, download, re-upload as we say goodbye to our listeners and viewers and supporters around the world. We will be exiting our brilliant guests this evening. You've heard it directly from them. You can hold them accountable for everything that they said during the course of this very important and I believe historical conversation. Let's remember to ask ourselves every day, what are we doing to make our cities, our country, and our world a better place? Until the next edition of the People's Voice, let's remember to stay healthy, stay empowered, stay informed, and of course, as always, the power of the people is stronger than people in power. Revolutionary peace. Good night and take care.